Bishop Mitchell Rozanski has announced the creation of a new, independent 10-member task force to help the Springfield Catholic Diocese better respond to the allegations of clergy sex abuse. The group will help develop a strategic plan to improve existing policies and procedures when it comes to clergy abuse allegations and will be chaired by retired Superior Court Judge Daniel Ford. Connecting Point's Hershel spoke with the bishop about the role of the newly formed task force, as well as how the reopening of churches across the state is going.
Well, I'm grateful to retired Judge Daniel Ford and to Irene Woods for being chair and co-chair of this task force. And on it, we have people who are experts in that field. And we know that we can improve, we can do better in responding to victims who come to us and in being able to deal with this scourge of any type of abuse that comes to our attention. So I'm grateful to all of the task force members who are there for the interest of, first of all, the victims and the interest of helping us as a church to respond the best way we can to this issue.
Can you tell us just how large the task force is going to be in terms of members and or some of the members, or at least some of the background that they come from who are on the task force?
Sure. Well, Judge Daniel Ford is a retired Massachusetts Superior Court judge. Irene Woods is the executive director of Children's Advocacy Center of Franklin County. And our other members are either those who have been directly involved in working with those who are abused, or any type of expertise in terms of psychology that would help to deal with any type of sexual abuse. There are about 10 members on the task force.
Is this task force, Bishop Rozanski, connected to that memo of understanding announced just a little while ago to notify law enforcement of any clergy abuse allegations? Is it tied into that?
Well, I believe that we are in a step process of seeing what we can do best. So we have done the memorandum of understanding. That memorandum of understanding with the three Western Massachusetts district attorneys' offices is complete. That is done. And we've appointed new investigators who will research any allegations that come into us. So those parts are already done. What the task force will do will take what the Judge Bayless report, which is the investigation as to how we handled allegations against Bishop Christopher Weldon, and how our process works for victims, for investigations, and getting to the heart of the matter. So their purpose is twofold. One, to look over the report and see about the allegations against Bishop Christopher Weldon. And secondly, to find out within our response to those allegations what we can do better.
Bishop Rozanski, is there any update you can give us in terms of how that investigation by retired Judge Bayless is going into allegations against the late Bishop Christopher Weldon? Any idea when that might be completed?
I believe that we should have that within a matter of a few weeks. Judge Bayless has been working very hard on that report, very diligently, has put a lot of time into it, and is coming toward the part where he can hand over the report.
Bishop Rozanski, will this new task force that's being created now, will that replace the Office of Safe Environment and Victim Assistance that was announced last year that's headed by Jeff Trant, or will they be working in conjunction with that?
Actually, they will be working in conjunction with our Office of Victim Assistance. Jeff Trant will serve as our staff person to that task force, and they will really inform myself, Jeff Trant, and our diocese what steps we need to make to respond better to any allegations of abuse.
And how closely will this task force be working, for example, with local district attorneys like Anthony Gallooni, for example, in Hamden County?
I think the task force will have people that they would like to talk to, perhaps as they respond to the Judge Vilas report. But their goal is to help us as a diocese to hone our responses to any types of allegations of sexual abuse.
Bishop Rozanski, if we can move on to another topic now, and that is the reopening of Catholic churches within the diocese. You have allowed that with restrictions, obviously, for churches to reopen as soon as last weekend. I know some of them did. Some of them didn't and are waiting to be able to implement those protocols. Can you tell us just how last weekend went in terms of those churches who were reopened and what the response was?
Well, first of all, before they actually reopened, we had a set of guidelines about the 40% attendance rate of the capacity of the churches, of teams that had to be in place to guide people so that they were respecting social distancing, and of those who were volunteering afterward to clean the pews, to disinfect the church in between masses. So when any parish had all of those things in place, they were allowed to open. Some of our parishes were ready, some of our parishes needed more time, but I believe that most of our parishes will be open, if not all, by this coming weekend, which is Pentecost weekend. So I would like to thank all of our parishioners who have been so patient and who have respected the guidelines and helped us to have a good opening of our churches this past weekend and again this coming weekend.
I know experts in the field of infectious disease have given a list of low to moderate to high risk activities during this COVID-19 pandemic. And for example, the opening of churches was high on the list in terms of potential high risk. So there are a lot of restrictions that have to be heeded before these churches are opened. Are you satisfied that the individual churches are going by these protocols and will in fact implement all those specific restrictions?
We had been planning for some time, anticipating the reopening of the churches. So we thought through what would be needed to be done in order to safely reopen. And we anticipated very well both the governor's guidelines and the CDC guidelines for opening our churches. So only when we were satisfied that all of those protocols were in place were our churches open.
Bishop, any idea when some of the sacraments, whether it's baptism, funerals, for example, marriages, will be open to the church again?
Well, we're asking that if there are sacraments that are scheduled, for example, baptisms or weddings, that we keep in place all of the protocols that we would for a regular Sunday Mass. So for instance, if a couple's getting married and they've invited 50 guests to the wedding, they would be spread out through the church so that social distance would be respected, wearing face masks as we would every weekend at masses until further notice. So we're allowing sacraments to happen, to occur, but again, respecting all of the guidelines that are given to us.
And Bishop Rozanski, for those parishioners who still, perhaps because of age or health related issues, who still feel a little unsure, perhaps uneasy about going back into an environment where there are a number of people within the church, what would your message be to those Catholics?
If we look through the Gospels, the first rule that Jesus really shows us is the rule of common sense. And if someone is in a vulnerable category, and if someone feels that they're not ready to come back to church because of their age or their vulnerability, the dispensation is still there from the obligation of attending church. And we would encourage them to watch the live stream masses that are still coming from the parishes. We haven't stopped those live streams from the parishes. So please stay at home. Please be safe and know that when we are all ready and you are all ready to come back, then you will be welcomed back.